I feel I need to clear up a misconception first. The series is called Decks Done Dirty, not Doo-Doo Decks. This series isn't about archetypes that suck, it's about why Konami are cowards. Also, the first two names for the series didn't exactly seem like they had any actual staying power. This deck does suck though. I will not have you insist the deck is good when hand after hand after hand after hand after hand after hand, this deck doesn't fucking work! There are also those who think you shouldn't criticize bad or mid decks. No, I don't expect every deck to be on the same level as Snake Eyes. I expect them to function competently. If you want Konami to keep selling you broken down cars, I think you're the problem. Vanquish Soul is a deck that produces the same endorphins in your brain that managing your inventory in a game like Resident Evil does. It's extremely satisfying not only to sequence your effects well, but to also find your way to the proper reveals to activate their effects at a critical moment. The deck feels so rewarding to play when it functions. 90% of duels, it's a test of your faith. Is there really a god in a world where this hand is the norm? Unless this last fighter is the reincarnation of Circular, this deck is just going to be saddled with the identity of a mid deck that can play Shifter, as well as flip There Can Only Be Agony. If we're ignoring the floodgates closing the massive gaps, this deck was also done the dirtiest when released in the TCG, what with nearly all the deck being rarity bumped to UR. Did it again in Master Duel too. Just love that. Of course, the most popular archetype in the set just so happens to be all URs by the time it comes to the TCG. Just ignore the one card that made this deck so appealing in an OCG setting. With the deck being perceived as just okay, it was never going to see widespread play with the price tag on it. Very cool to sabotage one of your more well-balanced decks, Konami. While it saw some level of success in spite of the cost, it was mostly dependent on floodgates and draw spells. Cards that could facilitate getting to the part where the deck actually spins its wheels. And I don't think I really have to explain to you why floodgate dependency is a bad thing for design. The best way to determine a deck's core strength is to view its functionality in isolation, seeing if it's capable of functioning competently on its own merits. So let's start by breaking down the roster the only way that you can in a fighting game, with a tier list. So, Raisin is tier 0. If you're not playing him, you're losing. He's one of the 3 normal summons in the deck, but he's also the only one that actually does something. He's the archetypal Stratos. But I feel like with how the deck is designed, it would have genuinely been fine if all 3 normal summons were a Stratos. Considering the fact this deck plays a much slower game with only 1 free body, being able to get card value to hand on each card would make the deck functional. Every Vanquish Soul has 2 effects that they can activate by revealing specific attributes from your hand, and only 1 of said effects can be activated that turn. Mind on Air is an FTK against this deck, by the way. Enjoy that knowledge. Raisin has a protection effect, which is also... I just realized I've been calling him Raisin this entire time, and it's Ra Zen because it's the Ra Sen style. Raisin has a protection effect, which is also common amongst other fighters. The commonality in their cost being that they reveal the same attribute as themselves. But it's especially funny on Raisin. You see, they explicitly state you can't chain either effect to his on-summon effect. They don't want you to be able to resolve his column pop at the end of the chain link, because being able to respond to a negation or a pop in the same chain would be too good for a deck that folds to Ash. As is, it's summon Raisin or die, and that's not exactly a fun gameplay loop. In tier 1 we have no one. There's a reason there's a tier 0. Raisin being crucial to the deck's game plan means everyone else has to match his performance in the deck. None of them come remotely close to doing so. As a result, we have to skip a tier down and gentlemen's into these. So, heading off tier 2, we have Rock of the Vanquisher. This is the archetype's second most crucial monster. Rock can add back a verses from grave or special verses from hand. Sadly, it can't use both effects because that'd be a little too good now, wouldn't it? Considering it's a Link one that actually has a decent restriction already, I think it would have been alright to allow both effects. This wouldn't be the end of the world if the deck could pick up for the slack. It's also technically not a Vanquish Soul card, which isn't as big an issue as it is for a certain other card. Mad Love is the archetypal spell Trap Searcher. There's just one problem. The best spell in the deck isn't searchable. Snow, Dust, and Continual are all fine one-ups in the deck, but not really good beyond that context. All these cards are reactive or require setup. Drawing them means Mad Love does nothing in your open, and because Stake Your Soul isn't searchable, she really does nothing to start your plays. Continue lets you reborn a Vanquish Soul, but because of the way the deck is designed, this isn't conducive to starting your plays, which is what the deck desperately needs. Continue does allow you to choose to add to hand instead of reborn, which ain't bad on paper, but in practice doesn't have nearly the amount of application that it should. Outside of her searching, she has the more quirky effects of the roster. By revealing a Dark, she can sink a monster's attack and defense by 500 permanently. This effect isn't usually good, but boy, when it comes up, does it ever come up. Which is a neat thing I like about this deck. The decision to make these cards have two separate effects that have an actual balance and cost behind them means it's perfectly fine to print pack filler tier versatility effects on them as long as they also do something meaningful. Her other reveal effect bounces a card with the lowest defense on field. The Earth requirement is an issue we'll get to, but this effect only serves as another reason why Links are a headache. Links don't have defense, and they're not treated as having 0 defense either, so she can't bounce Links, which I'd say is the #1 card type you want to be bouncing. But hey, the effect ain't too bad. Just pay attention to defense values and you should be fine. Until we get a spell that actually helps the deck start its plays, Mad Love is stuck in Tier 2. Nearing the end of Tier 2, we have Xiaolong. Being able to weave a combo between summoning him, tagging him out, then using a reveal effect to then special him back to keep up field presence is one of the most satisfying mechanical feats of this deck. The fact they all reveal for cost means even if your monsters are negated, you can still activate the effect and get Xiaolong onto the field. Other than that, his reveal effects are pretty good as well. Reveal one fire monster to swap a monster's battle position. Another case of a so-so effect that can be a really nice tool when you need it. His more prominent effect, however, if you reveal 2 fires, you can search any Vanquish Soul card from your deck. Still not Stake Your Soul, of course, but the thought counts. There's just one issue with Xiaolong. You're not going to have fires in your hand. Rosin and Xiaolong himself are both cards you want on field. While you do want to cycle Rosin back to hand to keep getting his effect, you still need another fire. Hell of an ask when the most critical card to search is also a mandatory reveal. Of course, you can reveal monsters that aren't Vanquish Soul. Finally! Opening 2 Ash has a payoff. He's also not a normal summon nor a tag out like the other 2 big guys. While I'm all for this design practice, him being the only support added to a deck full of bricks and near no starters doesn't fix the deck's problems and only serves to exacerbate them. As the deck is now, Xiaolong is kind of mid, but he absolutely has the potential to be the cornerstone of the deck. To cap off Tier 2, we have Heavy Borger. Borger is one of the better cards in the deck, mainly because it's the only other one that can generate card value. Like most versus monsters, its effect to reveal a Dark for a draw is fine in a context the deck currently doesn't exist in. You just get it twisted, you will draw the missing attribute. It's a satisfying combo to reveal Borger off of Stake to summon Mad Love to get her effect, then tag her out for Borger to get his effect. It's just a shame this only happens once in a blood moon. Borger has another comical effect of revealing a fire and an earth for 1500 burn damage. Just what the deck needed. A time card! Unironically, this burn effect is actually nice. Other than just dumb time shenanigans, it can genuinely be what gets you over the edge for lethal. Borger is one of the 2 big bunguses in the deck that tag out a fighter to enter the ring, much like actual fighting games. However, unlike fighting games, you aren't able to tag out mid-battle. Because of that, Borger's burn effect feels a little like an apology for that design decision. I mean, he can inflict 4000 damage, then another 1500 on your opponent's turn. That's pretty scary. The king of Tier 3 himself, the one atop the porcelain throne, Caesar Vallius. He kind of sucks. He has the best protection effect, but like the rest under him, he can only use one of his effects per turn. I don't know why the boss monster of this archetype couldn't have been afforded the privilege to display there's a gap in power level by having him able to use both of his effects, but you know, maybe it's poetic that they're all on the same playing field. I don't know, fuck you. Since he doesn't do anything separate from his reveal effects, the protection effect feels extremely pointless. There are near zero scenarios where choosing to protect him over popping a card is optimal. Praying your opponent can't run over a 3k bungus or out him later isn't exactly an ideal scenario. The only scenario where you would choose to use it over his other effect is because you can't activate it. He has an effect to pop a card by revealing 3 different attributes. Granted, it is non-targeting, and that does go a long way, but this is where we get to the fundamental issue with the deck's design. The reliance on 3 different attributes in hand is an insane ask, and I get it. He's the boss monster, so he does the big reveal. Like I said, if he did something else impactful beyond his reveal effects, these effects would be fine. But because they're all he does, and because he's one of the bricks in the deck, the cost doesn't match the effects. Especially when it comes to Earth. Earth is the second highest populated attribute in the game, and yet most of its offerings aren't very good, and they don't get better in Archetype. If you're playing this deck in Master Duel or the OCG, you may find yourself unironically holding Maxi just so you can use it for a reveal, which maybe your opponent will concede on the spot upon seeing. Pantera, the final fighter of Tier 3, is our only other in-archetype Earth, and she's unfortunately not that good. She is a free body, but just like every other fighter on this roster, doesn't accomplish much by herself in this deck. Her effect to pop back row is nice utility, it's just a shame utility isn't exactly what this deck needs right now. Her pop effect can also pop your own spell traps. Hold on, let me add Unchained Vanquish Soul to my notes. So there's potential for her to open up synergies with destroying your own spell traps. She also unfortunately has the weakest protection effect, being only protected in battle. As stated, these two don't do a whole lot for the deck, and as a result, you don't want to be playing too many copies of them. But then you encounter the issue of it being more difficult to have an Earth in hand after summoning them, rendering all their effects null. If this deck needs anything, it's a massive rebalancing for its Earths. However, what rebalancing can't fix is this tier. In literally unplayable is Pluton HG. Why did they print this card? It was only playable at the start because it was a searchable fire reveal off of Razen. But the moment Xiaolong was printed, Photon disappeared from the list. The fact that I misspoke and called him Photon kinda says it all, doesn't it? Awful summoning condition and awful effects. If Pluton was meant as a joke fighter, I'm not laughing. The only funny thing about Pluton is that he's the only monster in the deck that isn't in ultra rare. While everyone else on this tier list can shift higher with a proper balancing patch to the game, nothing, and I mean nothing, can fix Pluton. The one thing Pluton has going for it is that you can summon it during your opponent's turn 1 and then tag him out for an actual good card. But as we've established, sequencing the right fighters and the right reveals is not easy to do in this deck, and it certainly isn't going to pan out in the opening hand. If anything, they better print a good card with the same summoning condition. To sum up the problem with this deck's roster, it's that they have very little actual synergy within the context of a functional deck. This is a deck build archetype, and those are known for being released in unplayable states. It's just a shame the only support we got was Xiaolong and Snow, and while they were really strong additions, they didn't really fix the deck's outlying issues. They just announced new support for Valmonica, and while yes, I'm pretty happy about that because I like the deck, well, I'm not so happy that it's an Omni-Negate, but you know, you take what you get. When are we gonna get Vanquish Soul support? Just wondering. We know we're getting at least one more card, but I don't think a singular card can resolve this massive flaw in design. Outside of the fighters, we have our spell and trap lineup. Whoever decided that stakes shouldn't be searchable should be comboed into a wall for all of eternity. Since it isn't searchable, you have to draw it. It has applications for fire and dark monsters, reveal fire so you get Razen, reveal a Dark to get Borger, and pray you draw Rosin, or even get Madlove to search a spell or trap. But when it comes to Earth, Pantera and Caesar do nothing for your game plan. You're just hoping that revealing Maxi with Stake is enough to cause your opponent to scoop. I should hope we get a new Earth that actually gives an Earth reveal value. While there are spell traps you can search, they don't do much of anything to alleviate the deck's biggest issue. You run one of these cards if at all, and I swear to God, Vanquish Soul in particular is the worst when it comes to garnets. I will draw all three in sequence far more often than drawing none of them. Continue is the only one that can feasibly do anything for you, but even then you need to get a body engraved for it to matter. Dust Devil is a nice non-targeting Book of Moon that sets cards for each versus you control. Trinity Burst, it's not very good. It summons 2 bodies from hand, said bodies needing to be different attributes from the one on field, as well as not being the same name. I don't see that being an issue. It bounces all the cards in the columns that you summoned them to, and bounces them back to the hand at end phase. The problem is, there isn't enough card value going around to benefit from getting these 2 bodies out of hand, with the reveal effects likely being put offline. If it were a quick play, it could have been a pretty damn good starter, but since it's a trap, it's too gimmicky to consider playing. If more cards worked like Rosin and were able to convert into instant card value, this might be worth playing, but I wouldn't hold my breath for that. Calamity is an Omni-Negate, but specifically for targeting effects. Much like Trinity Burst, it's far too gimmicky to do anything meaningful for the deck. Snow Devil, on the other hand, is somewhat of a win con for the deck. By revealing all 3 attributes, you can special a Vanquish Soul, protect your Vanquish Soul monsters from card effects, and destroy all monsters on the field in sequence based on the number of reveals. It also does incremental burn damage, is a little treat. Said treat just being lethal sometimes. Non-targeting mass destruction is phenomenal. This card is all around great, but the need to reveal 3 for its only good effect makes it feel middling most times. If it had better effects that made it worth settling for revealing less attributes, this would be a perfect card. Unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. As is, it feels like a justification for making 3 reveals difficult to achieve, rather than something that the deck can manage with some level of competency. While it's very satisfying to manage your attributes and weave the frame-perfect combo, resolving the reveal 3 effects feels crucial to avoid losing, and less like an actual challenge to win more. With the deck's current design, this is far too unreasonable of an ask, making this deck unplayable. At least not without some DLC! The deck is entirely dependent on outside help to fill out its reveal quota. There is fun in finding cards with unique synergies with the archetype, but sadly, you're not gonna find them. Shocker, there aren't very many archetypes that use Dark, Fire, and Earth all in the same lineup. This forces you to cram very specific engines with anything resembling synergy into the deck. And every time I try to come up with a new idea, they get less and less coherent. But what if we put Mimigals in the deck? They are Earth. I might as well just talk about the tried and true. Bystials and Kashtira are the best because they're just strong cards that maintain card value in hand and happen to fill out the reveal quota. Fenrir, who is an amazing card on field, but also searches a monster that you can reveal for a Vanquish Soul effect. A Fire in Riseheart, and an Earth in itself. Taking away the second Fenrir was actually a Vanquish Soul hit. Honestly, errata Fenrir to be a Vanquish Soul. Keep his summoning condition, change his search to a versus card, then make his banish require reveals. And then you have a balanced card. Real great that the deck's weakest attribute lost its best reveal, since the archetype of colonizers doesn't have a single dark monster. What did Konami mean by this? This means Bystials have to fulfill your dark reveals. Magnamut can get you Drew a Swarm for another dark reveal, or Caesar. Since he's a dragon, that's where Vanquish Soul Dragon Maid comes in. And for fire reveals, well, you could just be playing a better deck at that point. And the Vanquish Soul cards are only going to get in the way of that better deck. For a short time, I played Diabell Star in the deck because she's a good dark, but slowly realized she isn't super synergistic with a deck that wants to retain card value in hand. More often than not, she just ended up being another big beatstick on the field and that's it. And unfortunately, or fortunately depending on your wallet, Fiendsmith, a new powerful archetype that's being used as an engine in every deck you can possibly cram it into, are lights. So this deck doesn't even get to play with the shiny new toys in any unique way. While Dempsey lets you search Razen, and the deck is capable of making rank 4, this requires you to find a rank 4 engine that doesn't use your normal summon, and doesn't lock you. Not only that, but it also has to generate hand advantage so the reveals are still online. The best and only thing you can do with Dempsey is Special Pantera, specific card, also a 1 of in the deck because she doesn't generate card value. Normal Mad Love, grab Continue, overlay for Dempsey, bin Razen, continue to revive Razen, pray your opponent doesn't have Ash or a way to banish, then congratulations! You've gone -2 in reveals just to get the most crucial card in the deck about maintaining reveals. But don't worry, you can link off Razen and get one of them back, still gaining no value. The fact that you have to unironically play Durandal just so you can get Razen more is embarrassing. Other than being the biggest Ash magnet, just from the visible desperation in activating the card alone, because this deck is crammed with a bunch of giant idiots you can't summon freely, there are times where you have to equip it to your opponent's monster, and hope they don't pull the rug out from under you. Or if you open it going first with no summons, you're left praying you don't draw another brick. You still have to draw one of the archetypal normal summons with Durandal. A major issue with finding outside help is that only the 3 attributes really fit into the deck. So any hand trap or engine piece that isn't Earth, Fire, or Dark is really going to rot in your hand. Thank God Shifter's a Dark. What else would this deck do? Ain't it just convenient this deck can also just flip Tikaboo? This is what more often than not ends up being the case. You are using hand traps, cards you are meant to keep a secret, to facilitate your reveals. And if you can't find any way to Razen, you're left trying to flip floodgates to wait until you're actually able to play the game. If you have to rely on floodgates to fix your deck's problems, the deck is bunk on a fundamental level. This deck sucks at what it wants to do, and there's no outside help to save the deck from its horrible failings. Let's get on to what the deck needs to work on so we can cut these tumors from the list. I think I've made it abundantly clear throughout this video, the deck's current design is a poor foundation, despite having a perfect blueprint. The reveal elements actually serve as a really good balancing mechanic and not just an archetypal gimmick for cheap flair. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. With the deck's current design, these reveal effects are ass. The only mandatory shift this deck needs is making reveals easier to establish and maintain. This deck's costs are nowhere near appropriate for its power level, which is another potential concern. Knowing Konami, they do have a history of retroactively justifying awful restrictions. I should hope this is enough explanation as to why the deck should better work around its restrictions, rather than validating them with a degenerate payoff. Something I'd like to see is new fighters that have an emphasis on going first and going second effects. Most of them have their going first effects being their on-summon effect. Then the reveal effects can function going second, but even if the odds of resolving them are low, the event they help is even lower. They have more use in turn 2 if you go first. They can be fine pieces of interruption, but there really is no greater decision making behind which effect you choose other than if you have the necessary reveals. It makes it feel like the fact that they can only use one reveal effect per turn is a design flaw, and not a legitimate balancing restriction. A facet of the deck that is severely lacking is playable spell traps that Madlove can search. I think it'd be a great idea to have continuous spells and traps that also have you do reveals in order to activate their effects. I recommend having these cards not ask for specific reveals, but just different reveals. That way the deck can actually get some mileage out of cards that aren't Fire, Dark, or Earth. Being a variety reveal for spell traps means they aren't just rotting in your hand all the time. My first thought would be a continuous that lets you reveal 2 attributes, then add a versus with a different attribute from the reveals. The reveals are meant to be button inputs for the combos of each fighter, but it doesn't exactly feel like a full breadth of a combo list on these cards. Could you imagine if these were all pendulum, just so they could fit a combo list on them? Might as well make cards that serve as an extension of their combo lists. Give Pantera the Tiger Drop on a support card. She deserves better. These could be equip-based and lean into embracing Durandal, but I don't think suddenly giving the deck an equip theme is exactly the most appealing change to make. The only cool thing I could think of with archetypal equips is gaining effects based on the attribute of the monster they're equipped to. You could also design an equip that equips a vanquished soul of every attribute to a vanquished soul you control, with all of them needing to be a different attribute from the equipped monster, and then you can have it bounce them to hand to resolve another interactive effect. This sets up the card as an interruption piece that can also fuel your hand with reveals for your vanquished souls to be online. But like I said, I don't think the sudden shift is something people would really clamor for. But hey, it's an idea that I think works in some capacity. I don't think it'd be good, but you could make a card based around alt skins for when you control multiple copies of the same fighter. Since you can't use each effect in a turn, the card in question could be a way to apply the second effect of a fighter. If this card were to be made, I'd hope it has another use than just this. Maybe target a monster you control and summon a vanquished soul from deck with the same attribute. This effect can get you another copy of a fighter, but it still has more practical value in summoning a different vanquished soul. Hell, you could even make the effect copy part be triggered as a bonus effect if you summon a fighter that's already on field. An archetypal search spell is a much needed addition. Just put the Konami code as an input in the artwork, referencing unlocking a secret fighter with a code. This way Stake not being searchable is fine. You could also make another card similar to Stake, make it so you target a monster in grave, and special a vanquished soul from deck with the same attribute. Or, if it's being a full inverse, it could fetch a different attribute. If it's searchable, you normal Mad Love, search it, link off Mad Love for Rock, then activate the spell to get Razen. Clean card value. You can also go as far as to make it able to target a card from either grave, and make it banish the target if it's your opponent's, or put it back to hand if it's yours. I really don't want Vanquished Soul to become a summon spam deck, but this deck struggles to summon one guy more often than it should. The deck really feels like you draw a Razen or pray whatever outside resource carries you to the end. The tag out mechanic also feels underwhelming. We only have 2 tag outs currently, and with both of them and Xiaolong, you're prone to bricking constantly. I'd like at least one summonable monster that can also tag out and secure some card value. Maybe a big guy that can be normaled if your field is empty or if you control a Vanquished Soul. This way the deck isn't just half bricks and half normals, of which also do nothing. I want to see more applications of tagging out in general, be it to rack up more damage in battle or by dodging effects. I think the most satisfying thing about tagging out in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is when you're using it to effectively dodge cards, attributing a monster with Econ to dodge Imperm so an effect still resolves. That's the sort of satisfying kick this deck should rock with. Of course, with cards like Razen and Pantera, it can be a little annoying that you can't tag out to allow their column pops to resolve, but there's still plenty of room for that element in the deck. Stake and Trinity Soul, fuck.
Check it out, I'm in the house like carpet.
Stake and Trinity Burst establish an idea for the deck and its balance around summoning. Since the cards bounce to hand at end phase, there's design space for getting on summon effects off, and then having them return to hand to use a more select set of fighters. Obviously, giving them cards that just summon a ton of guys is a slippery slope, so they'd likely need some serious restrictions. If the deck gets way more competent at filling up your hand, Trinity Burst could be a really good interruption tool for the deck. But considering it can bounce 3 columns, maybe that's not the most healthy card to make playable. There are so many times where Vanquished Soul monsters might as well just be vanillas, because the attribute reveals are too steep a cost when Razen is the only searcher in the deck. You need 2 fire, 1 earth, and 1 dark all in your hand in order to be able to resolve every effect. Unless you start printing element sabers that change in hand, we're not meeting these terms consistently with just Razen. So I think establishing a balance between guys on field and in hand is a fine design limitation to work with. A hypothetical example for this design would be creating cards that function like Hoppy or Squadron. You could even go so far as to make them also function like Lightworm so it can convert to a Synchro or an Xyz. They serve as reveals for your Vanquish Soul effects, then allow you to tag into an extra deck Vanquish Soul. You could choose to not really have a restriction on their summon, or require you to control an attribute to use their hand effect. I think the only obvious restriction would be that they can only use their effect to make an extra deck Vanquish Soul monster. The extra deck could serve as a mechanical way to adapt character ultimates into the game. Synchro Vanquish Soul could return attributes from grave to hand to activate their effects, so as to keep up the theme of maintaining your resources. Then Xyz's Vanquish Soul could detach a specific attribute to activate an effect. And if you feel like these extra deck monsters sticking around is too much field presence for the deck's intended playstyle, they can apply the Gold Pride philosophy of tagging back into the main deck version at end phase. Or you could make it at will so the deck can actually get to Razan. It would get out of hand for the extra deck to make an Xyz and Synchro for every fighter, so the type of extra deck counterpart can also be tied to the attribute. Synchro for fire, Earth for Lynx, and Dark for Xyz. While Rock is a Dark, it's also not a Vanquish Soul, so the theme is still there. This leaves a way for the Hoppy or Lightworm hybrid to still be in theme. Having it target an attribute on your field, then perform the corresponding summon with them. If the target is fire, special it, then immediately Synchro. If the target is dark, special it, copy the target's level, then immediately Xyz. Then Earth, Link summon. With a Synchro for Razan and Zhalong, making this theoretical card a level 1 allows you to Synchro climb between their extra deck counterparts. Not only is it another satisfying way to adapt combo attacks to actual gameplay, Zhalong is meant to be Razan's senior in the Rasen style school they attended. Having the capacity to Synchro climb from Razan's Synchro to Zhalong's conveys how Razan can reach the same heights as Zhalong. It's peak storytelling through game mechanics. Of course, this design direction is out of left field and not exactly realistic. I just think it'd be a neat way to expand upon the deck's playstyle as well as improve it, giving your fighters a way to tag out via the extra deck. That way the deck stops combo dropping. Hell, you could even give the deck its own archetypal mask change. Or I guess if you're going to make it specific to the name, Nex. This card gets worse every time you read it. It's truly a work of art. Extra deck monsters haven't been written off entirely for this deck. You'd also have to weigh their place with the Link one. Since you usually use it to special Vanquish Soul on your turn, it would synergize with the theoretical Hoppy or Lightworm, being able to put it back in your hand to perform another extra deck summon. Either another extra deck mechanic, or the Synchro climb I mentioned. There's just a lot of different directions even this concept can go for the deck. The point is that it's a way for cards to actually have value in your hand as well as being able to retain that value. Something the deck currently struggles with. The most important thing for any piece of support for this deck to do is that. Being valuable on field and hand. They just need to figure out unique ways for that to be the case, while also making them actually good. I'll tell you what I don't want to see. I don't want to see them implement another attribute. This deck doesn't need to jump through more hoops. Fire and especially Earth need more slots on the roster, and they need to be way more impactful for the deck. But who knows, if you add light to the reveal check, Fiendsmith fits in snugly, and maybe that's just all the deck wants. You can also make a BLS who reveals the light and dark instead. But until this deck gets an update, we're not making it to EVO with this one, boys. It just takes one good patch to this deck, and it's playable. Which is the only thing I want out of the deck, because I don't think the most fun gameplay in the game should be locked behind drawing a single card.